Hi, everybody. Welcome. Oh, chat's on the screen. And for a minute, I was like, "Where's chat?" It's not on that screen.
It only loads once the scene is over.
That makes sense, because it takes up all the processing, all the process. Yep, that's a word. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me on this fine Thursday afternoon. There was a brief period of time in which we were like, maybe this stream will not happen because massive chunks of power are out in this area. So that was fun. But it turns out did not hit our studio. Actually, like the last time that there was also like a power outage, except that got the block that we were on, but somehow missed our building, which was pretty shiny. So anyway, we're here. We have power, so ha 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 to those who don't, I guess. Yep. Welcome to Geek Space TV if you happen to be new here. My name is Random Tuesday, and today we're going to talk about playing and running tabletop RPGs. In the background, I can hear Anna laughing, and in her mind, I can hear the thoughts, which is basically, wait, why are we doing this again? Why do I have this person on my channel apparently every night this week? These are good questions that we ask ourselves, but it's okay. Why am I here to... What am I doing? I'm talking about the weather. You tweeted about it. I thought I would talk about... Whatever. It's fine. I'm not saying where we are.
No, it's fine.
Am I moving too much? Like, what am I feel like I'm doing...
I'm fixing it. Don't worry. I'm working on it. It's just the C922 being in C922.
It's but C922 is always a but. I had camera issues for like the first time in a long time today. So yeah, hi everybody. We're here. The show is us talking about playing and running tabletop RPGs because I have ostensibly a significant number of hours in which I have done both of those things, and I am here to shed my knowledge and wisdom. Dune Trooper, goodness me, thank you so much for gifting those 5 subscriptions to the Legion. The 5 subscriptions. So we're going to talk about a few different things. Hi, Courier 3. Related to running RPGs. I have some different things to talk about, but as always with this show, the best thing to do if you have a question that you would like me to address is to put the word question somewhere in your sentence, and then it will highlight it for me in chat, and I will endeavor to get to that question as soon as I am able to do so. Because my train of thought is meandering and wandering and easy for me to forget. But yeah, we'll be talking about a lot of different things and kind of going a little bit all over the place. This will be our last behind the screens for 2018 because, fun fact, 2018 ends in like a week and a half. And we will be coming back in the new year with some more behind the screens and then bringing in some new things and other fun stuff. Small, relatively stable reactor. Yeah, that's why we have power, because there's an actual, we have like an arc reactor just in this building. It only powers this building, but that's what we have. We're great. The first show of the new year, well, that's a good question, Iffy. If I look at a calendar, the production and programming princess should be able to tell you. It's me. I'm that person. I am the production and programming princess. The first show, because should be Worlds Beyond on Wednesday night, because that's the first. I mean, the first is a Tuesday, and we don't have any shows on a Tuesday. That'll be the first show, and the second show will be the first episode of Night Witches on January 5th, Saturday, January 5th. So that's very exciting.
One might even say that show is nigh.
That show is nigh.
On Twitch, even.
That's real bad. It's a nigh Twitch show. Something like that. That doesn't quite work as well, but that's okay. I tried.
Way to kill my joke, Lauren!
It's fine. I wasn't trying to drink from the coffee cup and it wasn't working because I had my mouth in the wrong place. But yeah.
You're totally organized.
So I'm very excited. That's going to be our first 2 shows coming back in the new year, and then later on in January we will be starting up some new content. Hopefully, that's the plan. Hosted by people at the studio. I don't know how to talk about it because it hasn't been announced yet, but whatever. We're here. It's cool. Night Witches. Anna's playing with a spotlight in the background, which is very distracting for me.
Oh, wait until it's
fun.
pointed at you.
Oh, great. There's going to be a spotlight in my face. It's going to be so good. So yeah, that is the news for Geek Space. Tomorrow will be our final show of this year. It will be our last episode of Crossmas, our second episode of Crossmas, which is also the last episode of Crossmas because it was a double shot espresso of RPG. And we will be broadcasting the first episode as a rerun. I think that's still the plan.
Yeah.
What
At about
was
noon.
at about
I'm
noon?
planning
Still the
on
idea,
doing it. Well, yeah.
give or take.
I might go in. I'm streaming then. That might be difficult. Whatever. I'll figure it out.
Sometime after noon and before 7 p.m.
With enough time to watch.
With enough time to watch the show. So by, I guess, 3 p.m. Because that would give it 4 hours. It would be done in time because it was only about a 3-hour show.
Yeah,
so
probably
for
about
us.
3.
Yeah, probably sometime around 3 p.m. We will
tweet
be
it out.
rebroadcasting, but stay tuned on Twitter so you can watch Jesus Christ. Was born in a week. Just definitely pointed a light in my eye. Yeah.
I warned you.
I'm not. I didn't tell Anna about Crossmas. I told the person who sounds like Anna, who also has the same name as Anna in the background, about Crossmas. So yeah, it'll be rebroadcast tomorrow. You can watch the first episode, and then you can stick around pretty much immediately afterwards and watch the second episode as we find out what happens with these amazing group of players that I happen to have access to. Question from Courier 3. You ran a group until very recently in World of Darkness. Yeah, World of Darkness is an intense system, and it turns out they were possibly not ready for the game you wanted to run. Frequently engaged with them, yet the last session ended in tears, and I had to call the session in the campaign. How do you deal with players who, despite wanting to, aren't able to do a game, and how do you as a GM realize that your friends are suffering and a game that they shouldn't play? That's a big question, and that is a very important one. So one of the things that you brought up, this is very not...
Still too bright?
Still very bright. I cannot look in that direction if the light is over there. Hi, William. Go to sleep. It's okay. You can do that. So the idea of safety is one of the best resources to look at safety mechanics in RPGs is LARPs. Because I think LARPs kind of did it first. Because a lot of... And don't quote me on any of this because I'm probably misquoting the entire history of the origin of RPGs. But a good chunk of RPGs, especially things like Dungeons and Dragons, which we're really familiar with, came out of wargaming as opposed to, like, feelings. Whereas LARP was like, but what if we just pretended to be these things as adults instead of children playing make-believe? And so LARP kind of had to get into that whole, wait a minute, if I'm like swearing at someone and being really horrible to them, even though we're friends, it's still very bright. That person may not like that fact, and we should probably have a conversation about it afterwards. And so LARP kind of had to learn how to do a lot of care and taking aftercare about RPGs and safety mechanics and things like that, because obviously they were dealing with things that could cross those lines. So LARP has a lot of resources. This is kind of one of those, you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, because there are things out there that you can use and do. And this is something you brought up, Courier 3, which I just wanted to touch on the kind of the first part where you said you used the safety mechanics and tools and resources that are out there. There is a great sheet, and I want to find it so we can retweet it from Geekspace, which is essentially a list of really useful safety mechanics that you can use in RPGs. And it covers some of the basic ones, like we touch on it here. I am really bad at reminding the players about this. Steph is much better at it, or was much better at it when she was doing it, that we use the X card system here. And that's just a really good default one to always have at a table. The X card is literally a card with an X on it in our case, but you can use it as a symbol. You can use, it might be the one that Bentham posted on Roll For It in terms of the sheet. I'll find it because we should definitely retweet it, and I'll probably share it with Roll For It and some of the other places. And I'm going to get to what Iffy said too, because that might be part of it. So we have an X card, and that's like your kind of a really good base level safety tool. If something happens in a game, any player and the GM, because the GM should also take care of their feelings, can tap the card or say X card, and whatever just immediately happened is undone. and it never happened, and you backtrack. And it's basically like a kind of a 10-second redo button or undo button. And it's typically for like, oh, the GM said something that I am very uncomfortable with. There's a good example. I had this happen to me as a GM. I made a comment about cruelty to an animal that one of my players was not okay with. They X-carded it, we backtracked, and I redid. Something else happened. This character did not do the thing that I really said. And that's the X card. No, the same page tool is a good one, but it's also a different one. The same page tool is a safety tool, but this is a sheet that I found circulated on Twitter that lists a bunch of different safety tools. So that's the one that I want to try and find, because I think it's a really good resource, and I can post it in Discord, and then we can tweet about it. We can do the Twitters. So the X card is a really great baseline tool that I recommend everybody use at your table. You can do it in live play. You can also do it in online play. Even if you're doing like typed play, you could just have someone be type X, capital X, or X card. So that is like a very base level safety mechanic that I recommend everyone have. But the X card is a reactive mechanic as opposed to a proactive mechanic. A proactive mechanic would be one where you're setting people up to have a more positive experience, as opposed to a reactive mechanic like the X card, where if something bad happens, you have a way of dealing with it. They're both important to have at the table, but like with all things, often it is better to be reactive than proactive as opposed to reactive. So some of the tools that the same page tool that Courier 3 pointed out is a really nice proactive tool, where you can give that, you might find that the questions are not relevant to you and you want to look for different tools or rewrite some of those questions. The same page tool basically asks you a lot of different questions, and it's a solid one for being like, how mechanical or crunchy do you want to be? How narrative do you want this story to be? What sort of tones or themes are you interested in? I have no idea if that's the correct one, Mangleport, because I lack the capability of clicking on that link, but Anakin, that may be the document. There was one.
It's more than one page.
Okay, that
I'll
is
tell you that much.
probably a great document, but not the one that I was immediately thinking of. I'll take a look at that one if you can like share it with me. That'd be cool. I'm 100% getting to your question, Courier 3. I'm just taking a very roundabout way to get there because I want to touch on some of the safety mechanics. The same page tool you brought up is a really good one. I do something similar. I do lines, palettes, and veils, and we can talk about this. Yeah, but the same page tool is about making sure you're all playing the type of game that everyone wants to be playing. But and Troopers commented a little bit on this, and Iffy brought it up. Sometimes players in EPK, I have been told, would frequently cry after episodes. And there was a lot of emotional feelings and things that would come out afterwards, where they had to do a lot of debrief and really go through the whole process after a show. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We often view RPGs as like, oh, you should be having fun all the time and everything's great and happy and fun. And for some people, that's all you want. Like for me personally, I tend not to want to play an RPG where I'm going to cry. But some people want that. And it's important to know if your players are okay with those feelings. So what my recommendation would be, and I don't know if this is what you did, but one thing you can do if you're noticing your players are having very emotional reactions to it is have a conversation in which you're saying that, thank you, EPK is Eat, Pray, Kill was one of our previous shows, GM'd by Sour Fruit Junkie. We had her on last week to talk about that whole process. But touching base with your players and being like, hey, are you okay with the fact that you guys are getting upset? Is that part of one of the things, like the experiences you would like to have in this RPG? Because it might be. For some people, having an emotional experience, happy or sad, like I went to Big Bad Con and people would often talk about, they'd be like, oh, I got so sad and I was crying and it was such an emotional experience. And I'm like, that's not my jam. But for some people, that really is what they want. So touching base, because knowing as a GM, you might not also be okay with that. It sounded like that wasn't an experience you wanted your players to be having, but it was maybe worth asking the question of like, you guys seem to be having all of these feelings. Is that something you want? But sometimes players aren't up for the game. Like Trooper brought up, like they're just not interested in that sort of play. It sounded like you did a lot of the sort of touching base in terms of making sure that everyone was emotionally okay afterwards. But I would say that also asking them, like, it's okay to retouch base on things like about the tone and the genre and the sort of style that you're running. Because people might be like, oh yeah, I want like a dark and gritty campaign. I want to have big feelings. And then like 3 weeks into big feelings, they're like, no, I was wrong. So it's okay to start with one idea of what your game is going to be like and end with a different idea of what your game is going to be like. I actually recommend redoing things like lines and palettes and veils. Re-talking about the same page tool, being like, hey, we've had these experiences. Is this still a type of game you want to play? This is what I was intending. To kind of constantly redo that check-in. But yeah, a World of Darkness is that. Like, it is emotionally charged. It's very dark. And so even if your players thought they were okay and ready for it, they may not have been. And that's okay. And that's not necessarily a criticism of you as a GM or them as players. It's just sometimes you think you're ready for something and you're not. I've had that experience a lot where I'm like, oh, I'm totally ready for this. And then I'm like, oh boy, I was not ready for that. So whatever, regardless of what safety mechanisms you're using in your game, and you should always have a few. I would always recommend at least one proactive one and at least one reactive one. So you have a way of dealing with people's feelings if they happen during a game, and you have a way of making sure that everyone's going to hopefully be okay before you start. But yeah, so lines, palettes, and veils. DC, it sounds like they did it on their session 0. I don't normally do this as part of a stream show. I don't show this part at least because I think it's very private. Some people are probably okay with it, and I think it can be a good thing and maybe something that we'll consider down the line for a future show. But part of it is that I lost my train of thought, but it's okay. It's over here somewhere. We're going to grab it and we're going to think about it again. That for me, the keeping players safe is also keeping them safe in not from the audience, but there's a different thing that happens when you put yourself in front of an audience. It is a more vulnerable position to be in, and I don't want players to feel like they can't say things because there's an audience watching, and that's why I don't tend to do those things, and I don't tend to broadcast a session 0 because it's there for you to fuck up and make mistakes. That's what a session 0 is about. And yes, you should always ask your players about consent. I think a good example from one of my shows recently that I did, I had 2 players who I was going to have my players kidnapped, like good old spy style. They were going to get kidnapped, and the way one of the possible mechanisms for them to get captured was that something was going to get slipped into their drink and they were going to get all fuzzy and pass out. That's not a thing a lot of people are okay with, because that's a thing that happens, and especially happens to women, where people slip things in your drink and it's a big fear and it's a thing. So I asked very explicitly, I was like, is this okay with something you're okay having happen to your character? And they said yes. And so I did it. If they had said no, I would have done something else. So I think it's important to give your players some agency and allow them to be, ask them about things like that. Because I was okay with doing it, and I knew the context of it, and there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of trust that happens. Like, they trusted that I was not going to do this in a way that would make them uncomfortable, and they trusted that they understood the context of it. But I still felt like it was important for me to ask, because that's not the sort of thing that I want to do to a player without them being okay with it. Because especially in the games that I run, I want people to be having fun. And if I'm making a player uncomfortable, then I'm probably getting in the way of them having fun. Yeah, Josh did basically say, like, yeah, that sounds great. I think they were like, as long as you're doing it in a spy way, and I was like, yeah, that's what we're doing. And sometimes this will never come up. You can run an entire campaign, you can have the X card, you can have done some preamble stuff, and you may never encounter issues. People might be fine the entire time. That's awesome. But it's better to be prepared for it than to not be prepared for it, and to have something bad happen and have someone be really uncomfortable. Like, especially if you're playing with anyone who has had traumatic experiences or PTSD, you might not know what their triggers are. You might not know what makes them uncomfortable, and that's okay. You don't need to know everything. But you should be prepared that you might touch on one of those things and be ready to do it. Is it a bad move if the players start down a path and make you as a GM feel uncomfortable? Is it okay? You as a GM are like, your feelings and emotions at the table are equally as valid. You are allowed to use tools like the X card. You are allowed to say things you don't want things to happen at your table, because you are also there to enjoy yourself. So yeah, if your players start down a path that you are uncomfortable with, then it is okay to say that no, we are not going to do this at the table. I'm going to use the X card. I'm going to X card what the player just did. Totally okay. Totally okay. Like, I want to stress that these tools are universal. Safety mechanic tools are universal. They're not just for the players to use to tell the GM they didn't like something. They're for the players to use to say they didn't like what another player did. They're for the GM to use to say they didn't like what. Sometimes you might be like, no, actually, I regret what I just said. I'm going to X card myself. So it's important. And that's something, that's like my recommendation, is to have some proactive tools, do some proactive things. So mentioning in terms of proactive tools, my favorite one to do, and I've picked this up from a few different places. I want to give most of the credit for me learning about it to Game to Grow, who's an organization in Seattle. They're really cool. I'm going to briefly plug them because they're a nonprofit that works to run D&D games for kids, specifically kids who are on the autism spectrum, and basically uses D&D to teach social skills. I think it's really cool.
Can I shine this on your face again?
Yes, please. It's fine.
Is it still really bad?
It's uncomfortable, but I just can't look at it.
No, that's not acceptable. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll probably
I
get
just
used to
can't
it.
test this on myself.
No, that's fair. The soft boxes are much easier because they're soft. Spotlights are
I know,
spotty.
but they serve different purposes.
I know.
Sorry.
It's okay. I think with a,
Thank you for that.
but it's,
Do your show.
I'm just gonna say, I can get used to it. Like, it's not a thing that, I've done stage shows. Like, I've had spotlights on my face. You get used to not looking in a certain direction. You like soft things. I like soft things too. Lines, palettes, and veils. This is my favorite one. I've started using it every time. Yeah, you get used to being blind. No. A lot of people do lines, and they'll just do lines. That's like the most common one that you'll see. And lines are basically your hard nose. They're topics that you don't want to have as part of a game. And bear in mind, they can be different. Like, I can be okay with topic A in a World of Darkness game, but not okay with topic A in a D&D game, because the context for those two things, my desire to be emotional or experience emotional things in those settings, can be different. So it's not like a set list for yourself that never changes. But it's important to have those topics in. And so, like, I'll always start with, I'm like, things that I'm not okay with, like rape, just not a thing that I want to have in my games. And so I'll always, as the GM, put that on the lines list, because it's important for me as a GM to say, like, hey, players, here are things that I don't want your characters to do, and I'm gonna X card if they happen. That you wanted for effect in story to an NPC, I hinted at it, but you didn't feel right after, and I probably wouldn't do that again. Yeah, it's okay to be like, maybe I wasn't okay with the fact that I did this. That made me uncomfortable. You're not always going to get it right. So I do lines, which are things that I'm not okay with happening in the game, or the players, the group as a whole. And then the other two, which some groups do and some groups don't do, but I like to do all three of them, is the middle one, which is the veil. Hi, Lopez. The veil is things that you are okay with having in your game, but you're not okay with having detailed descriptions of them happening. So I tend to put things like torture into that category, or sex. I'm fine if two players want to be like, yeah, we're having sex. Like, that's cool. I don't need you to describe it. I don't want to roll it. I don't want us to roll for it. Like, I just want to say that it happened, and not go into a lot of detail of like the intricacies of that interaction. So that for me is something that I'll put on that kind of middle column of the veil, the thing. And why it's called the veil, because you pull down the veil when it happens. It's the fade to black moment. You're like, okay, we're going to fade to black now. We describe the outcome of this, so you might be like, my two characters, at least my two characters, me and my two NPCs, both did it. Yeah, so we had this with the captain, the ship captain in Arden, and Sarah's character in Worlds Beyond. I was like, how far will Anon go with this? And I kind of let the player take control. And she was like, yeah, she'll get all up in that. I was like, cool, great. So they're having sex, and then we pull down the veil, and then we fade to black, and we can be like, we can, if we want to ask the question, were you both happy with it? But that's about as far as I'm probably going to go, and then we fade back into view in the next scene, in a different time and place and location. Right? And it's a great way to be like, you can have these things happening in your game without having to talk about them a ton, or narrate them. I did a similar thing with the players who were captured. I was like, they're going to be mean to you, and they're probably going to interrogate you. I don't want to go into the detail of like every piece of bodily harm they're going to commit to you. So we're going to pull down we're going to fade to black on that, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to maybe get you to do a roll to find out like how well you were able to resist this. And then we'll come back to it, because I don't need to narrate that. In a different game, in like a World of Darkness game, yeah, maybe we'd do that. Maybe we'd go into more detail about what they're actually experiencing. But in the sort of games that I'm running, I think about like, we're just not going to see all of it. And that's okay. Because I don't want to go into that detail, because it's just, it leads down a path that I'm not interested in, and the players might not be either. So those are your lines, your veils. And then you have the last one, which is your palette, which I think is honestly maybe even the more important piece sometimes. It's the things you want to have in your game. Your palette is like, it's like the palette of paint that you're going to paint your campaign with. I don't know. It's your likes and your dislikes. It's your yucks and your yums. But that was the phrase that my friend used, who was describing it. And so it's the palette. It's what you're going to paint the canvas of your RPG with. And the palette is the things that people want to have in the game, and they can be very specific. So in like Worlds Beyond, I asked them a question like, what settings do you want to go to? This is a campaign where you are hopping and jumping between different alternate dimensions and realities. And so I said like, where do you want to go? Like, what dimensions, like what fictional universes would you want to explore? And one of the ones they said was Mad Max, and I was like, great, we're going to the desert. And so I could essentially get from them both specific things, but also more general things like what are the types of stuff they want to have in a game. And that gives you some like solid guidance between the combination of the palette and the veil and the line, like knowing what they don't want to have in a game and what they do want to have in the game gives me some like solid direction for how I want to take the story. So that's one of the tools that I recommend everyone use. It's a solid tool for RPG safety. Other things, other safety related mechanics. That was a big question. You got me talking for like a solid 30 minutes. Do I find veils and lines on Twitch different for yourself? As in, my personal ones, do they vary by channel or by audience? Or are you talking about like what I've seen across in a home game versus in a streamed game? My like hard no's tend to be the same because they're just not things that I'm interested in exploring. Yeah, my hard no's tend not to change too much because they're just like things that I'm just not okay with. My veils also probably don't really change that much. I think my palette, the things that I want to have in a game, those are based off of the game itself. Like, what type of system are we running? But I also have a tendency to run, like, the I haven't run something like particularly gritty in a while because it's not my thing. But I think if I was in a game that was grittier, I'd probably be more inclined to. Oh, sweet! You have a new RPG safety mechanism. Nice. What is it? Tell me about it. I think my personal ones don't tend to change a ton, but like what I want to see in a game will vary based on what the game is about. Especially because for me as a GM, it is helpful if players are somewhat specific about the things they want to see in a game, as opposed to like generically, I want to see heroism. I'm like, okay, well, heroism is a big topic. Like, what type of heroism do we want to have? And so being a little bit more specific is more helpful. Especially if you know you're playing a show that's particularly steeped in tropes of a certain genre, being able to say like what tropes of that genre you're more interested in can be really nice. Thus why like in Worlds Beyond I wanted some specifics about the worlds people to go to, and that's not a thing you would ask for in other types of settings. How do you handle when someone's palette, what they want to see in a game is someone else's veil or red card? I will always say that lines and veils take precedent over someone else's palette, and that's probably where I'd have a conversation where I'd say, hey, you want to see this in a game and this person does not want to see this in a game. Maybe they're not a great fit to have in the same game. Maybe it's okay. Like, you might love all of your friends, but some games are right for some friends and some games are not right for other friends. So maybe you'd say, like, maybe we're just not going to run this game. We're going to do something different where you two are more comfortable. Or maybe one of you would be a better fit for somewhere else. But I will always say that someone's lines, like if someone says a hard no on it, then it's not allowed in the game. That's just something that we're not going to have because that takes precedent over someone wanting it in the game. Right? Because one person is going to be made unhappy and uncomfortable as opposed to the other one who may be mildly disappointed. And I would rather mild disappointment than deep-seated discomfort. Like, in a weighing out of what's better or worse, that's essentially where it ends up for me. But yeah, not all players, as Trooper's saying, not all players need to be in the same game or should be in the same game. And part of picking your players and picking your game, and they can happen in different orders. I have, like, groups of players that I really enjoy playing with, and so I will tailor the game that I want to play to that group, as opposed to being like, this is the game I want to play, and then, like, find the group to fit it. You can go either direction. They're both equally valid choices to make. Sometimes on one end where you're tailoring a group to a game, that can help you with like people self-selecting themselves to be in the type of game they would be interested in. On the other hand, you may not know or like how these players interact or get along with each other, so that's a whole nother thing. Getting a group together, scheduling. I have that as an exclamation point on my sheet. Scheduling. I'm trying to think if I've got other things to talk about. So with safety stuff, you have what you use before you start an RPG. You have what you have available to you at the table. And then you have the stuff you do after an episode. After a show, after a game, after a session. And those ones are really great. Like LARP has a lot of really good ones for those debriefing exercise. And you can do, like, there's a common one that I've seen, which is like, what do I want to carry with me? What do I want to leave behind? So something that like you really liked about the game that you want to kind of take forward into future games, and something that you didn't really like about the game that you want to leave behind. And they can be personal things like, oh, I didn't like how I shut down someone's answer. I'm going to leave that behind. So like in the future, I'm going to be more accepting, more taking more of what people say. But I really liked how my character took a risk, so I'm going to take that with me to the next game. Or they can be about another character. You can be like, oh, I really liked how this person did something, and so I'm going to take that forward. That's one that I've seen a few times. My recommendation is always, if two characters are not getting along, to touch base as human beings that aren't your character in some capacity. So when I was in a show where my character broke up with someone else's character and we were being horrible to each other in the show, we did a lot of yelling at each other afterwards that we thought each other were cool human beings and that we liked each other's presence, because we were being awful to each other on screen. And that's an important, like, there was no formal format we were using for that. That was just a like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be terrible to each other all the time. Because bleed is a thing. For Worlds Beyond, was Dale's lack of understanding around privacy was not something that we talked about. No, that was 100% like Dale was saying, Banzai saying, I'm going to do these things as Dale, and me being like, okay. And I think afterwards we had some conversations, and kind of as a group, like we've checked base, and no one's upset that Dale's done it, but I think there is also an understanding that like, and Banzai said the same thing, like Dale should get in trouble, and I'm like, yes, Dale is 100% gonna get in trouble. Is that like, I think there's the trust of the players that there will be consequences for this choice, but no one's upset that the choice has been made. Yeah, we yelled a lot. I'm sorry, my character's terrible. You're really great. Pup Chase, we are talking today behind the screens. We're talking about playing and running tabletop RPGs. My name is Random Tuesday. I am a GM on this channel here at Geekspace TV. I also am currently GMing a Sunday show over on a channel called Roll For It, and I have been playing and running RPGs on Twitch for 2-3 years now?
3 or 4.
3 or 4? Has it been that many years?
It's been at least 3.
I think you're right, it has been 3. Yeah, because I've been partnered for 2 years, and that was like a year into when I started. Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah, 3 years. 3 years. Just on Twitch. Just on. That's so many hours. I'm in like 3 a week right now. And I would totally do more if there were more hours in a day / week. Yeah, we are a nonprofit studio. That was a thing I didn't talk about at the beginning. If you would like to help support us here at Geekspace TV, you can do so through direct donations. I'll read your tips out as they come through. You can see our goal is over here for our weekly goal. It's our final one for the year. And then you can also support us regularly with monthly donations over on Patreon. And if you can't support us with money, you can help out by sharing the stream, hosting it, tweeting about it, talking about it, getting your friends and family to sit down and watch our various content. They take time. That is probably the greatest tragedy of RPGs, is like, I've tried like 2-hour sessions, and it's hard. It's hard to do it in 2 hours, like anything less than that. And you're like, well, we all sat down at a table together. We spent 30 minutes just talking to each other. Then we like made like 2 rolls, and then we were done. But yeah, there's a lot of systems out there. There are some that better facilitate shorter gaming sessions and also irregular play, which is something that I do recommend taking a look at. D&D is definitely designed around that like classic 4-hour sort of like encounter, like 3 encounter sort of structure. It is not the only game that is out there. If you want something similar to D&D that's a little bit quicker and lighter to play, Dungeon World is normally a good go-to. It's powered by the Apocalypse system, but there's a bunch of others. Anything that's powered by the Apocalypse is normally pretty easy to run. I am going to make a mess all over this sofa. I should not have said that. Sorry, Anna.
That would be a first.
Look, we cleaned up the mess from the cupcake. It's fine. Oh yeah, I heard about that Unspeakable. Someone introduced me to the game Pizza Ninja, where you are ninjas who have to deliver a pizza and you have to do it in 30 minutes or less. And that's the whole challenge. And I'm like, I like that concept. I don't know if you have to play it in real time, but I kind of want to try and run it where you're pizza ninjas and you actually, as players, have to do it in 30 minutes. You just set a timer and you're like, and go. Fate is another one. Fate is a more generic system. Powered by the Apocalypse tends to have like specific genres that each one is geared towards each rule set, as opposed to something like Fate. You made it in 20 minutes? Wait, do you actually play it with a timer? Is it done in real time? Oh, with one of those chess timers that stop and go. That would make sense. That would make sense. So, we've talked a little bit about safety mechanics. I've touched on the ones that I do beforehand. I look forward to hearing other ones that Trooper has. I would definitely recommend in the Behind the Screens channel over on our Discord, if you have particular safety mechanisms that I have not talked about for before, during, and after an RPG, please post them over in there. I am going to dig up that document that I am thinking of and post that over in that Discord as well, because it is, I think, a really useful resource, and it talks about and again, you don't have to use all of them. Like, there's no requirement to say, like, oh, you've got to run with every single safety mechanism. It's worth having a conversation with your group, and the more your group trusts each other, the more they're familiar with each other, the less intense your topic material for your RPG is, the fewer safety mechanisms you need. I would always say you want to have, which Funko? We have Captain Marvel and Julian Holtzman. I was like, I don't actually know which ones they are. We also have a gumball machine of dice. It's a little disappointing that it doesn't have gumballs.
Tell Club Chase to save that kind of question for Wind Down.
Oh, Wind Down, okay. Look, I wanted to answer the question.
I know, but I need some questions too. I will list all of the Funkos.
That's true, there are more in here. There are more. You can't eat dice, Whiskey Charlie. I guess arguably you can't really eat gumballs. The other person in this room is our beautiful CEO, Anna Geeks. She is going to be doing Wind Down a little bit later. She's our fearless leader, the coordinator of this geek space, the CEO, and all of that good stuff. The shiner of lights in one's eyes. I was gonna say so in terms of safety mechanisms, the more familiar you are with the group, and all of those things kind of determine what you need. I always recommend starting with at least some conversation to get everybody on the same page, whether that conversation is lines, palettes, and veils, or the same page tool, or some variation of something that works better for you. Something to get you started. Have a mechanism at the table in case something comes up that makes people uncomfortable. The X card is a really useful and very basic tool to have. And then be prepared to have a conversation afterwards. Some groups don't need debrief. For many groups, the only debrief you need is out of character time. Like, just time to hang out as players together and, like, reaffirm that you have friendships and relationships that are not the relationships between your two characters. It's part of why, like, I have a tendency to not leave immediately after a show. We all just sort of hang out and chat and, like, have conversations. And just that sort of, like, basic decompression. Hello, Initiative Coffee. I have some of their coffee. I need to get it ground. Oh, yeah, I know. So yeah, that's my my basic recommendation in terms of the core of safety mechanisms. And we can touch on this again in the future, obviously, as questions come up, and I would love to see other people's suggestions, so please post those in Discord, because I'm only talking about my personal experiences with them, but not everyone. Oh, it's okay. I can find a grinder. That's not an issue. We have access to those things. Yeah, hanging out before and after is genuinely, if only I knew a barista or two. Starbucks will grind your coffee. You can just take it there. Just be like, hey, I have this bag of coffee. Grind it for me. It's a thing they'll do. I have learned. So yeah, time outside of character is also important. safety mechanisms. Shall we talk about, I guess if there's other major questions of the topic du jour, I wrote a number of other different options down, so I will kind of give you guys a moment, talk amongst yourself, tell me what you would like me to wax poetic on for the next 45 minutes. Some of the things that I have written down are things like scheduling and feelings and players buying into story and helping people out at the table with taking initiative and improvising and world building and things like that. Yeah, someone told me that yeah, they'll do it. A 1920s blues song, Coffee Grinder, was often used as a naughty metaphor. What?
Well, that seems right.
I guess. Do you call a person what? I guess I don't follow. I feel like I'm having a Claudia moment where I'm not picking up what you're putting down there, Trooper. I'm sorry. Sorry. So now that we've thoroughly derailed this conversation with naughty metaphors and classic blues, what would people like to discuss? What concepts would people like to talk about? Rails. What are Rails? I can kind of go into, I can also, one of the other things, if people are interested, is debriefing some of the Worlds Beyond that we've had, but also talking about some of my plans and kind of a little bit of my process of what the final episode of Crossmas is going to look like. I have not played Dungeon World. Steph has used a lot of materials from Dungeon World for Eat, Pray, Kill. I know that's literally where she got many of the dungeons and monster sort of additions, because I think the Broken World system had a lot of core stuff, but she used the resources from Dungeon World to, this is actually a solid point, she used the resources from a different system, from Dungeon World, to supplement what she had in Worlds Beyond, through not Worlds Beyond, Broken Worlds. Oh no, why did I pick Worlds Beyond as a name? One-shot design. That's an interesting, I have done more one-shots, and it is a tricky conundrum. So she used a lot of Dungeon World to supplement some of the stuff for Eat, Pray, Kill. And that is a really great tool. So there is often, and some systems like help themselves with this, like Cypher system, playing the Strange, I can take anything from Cypher system and more or less port it over into the Strange setting, because they're cross-compatible. They're not quite as backwards compatible, but they're entirely forwards compatible. So stuff from Cypher can apply to the Strange. Not everything from the Strange could apply to every setting of the Cypher that you're choosing, because you kind of have to make some choices if you're choosing to play Cypher system, because it's a generic setting, but that doesn't mean you want everything in your generic setting. You might be playing a real-life setting, in which case you don't want people to have superpowers. But you might be playing like a high-powered superhero setting, in which case, then you do. So it's kind of a piece and stuff and compatibility. But it means that if I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't have, like, there isn't this list of creatures or monsters in the Cypher system or in the Strange book that I don't really like, but Cypher system has one that I prefer. So I can kind of pull stats and abilities from the base system. So some stuff are really built that way, where there's like a whole set of stuff you can use. But in other times, you'll find that like a system like Broken Worlds may not have everything that you want, because it's a smaller, simpler system, or just a smaller system as opposed to something on the larger scale. And so then you have something like Dungeon World, which is very compatible but not directly compatible, that you can take aspects from and use it in your game. You can also sometimes just go like hog wild and be like, well, technically they're not even compatible. So I think I did, I was playing Celestial Rangers, right, which is my Sailor Moon parody RPG that we are graciously hosted by the Geek Space to run. And it's based off of tri-stat, so it's really simple. You roll 2d6 and you're trying to roll low. And it is an incredibly simple system, for better or for worse. And like for a show that I don't do very often, it works super well. But the mechanism that I stole is, I think it's basically has it in Broken Worlds where you can make a broken roll or an empowered roll. So you roll an extra die and keep the 2 better rolls, or you roll an extra die and lose the better roll. And so it's essentially advantage or disadvantage. Like that's the same concept that it is. And I took that mechanism and I was like, yeah, let's say this is now part of the game. And so that was a way that I could be like, oh, I'm going to reward the players. I'm going to give them a bonus that's not just like a flat number. That's a little bit more loosey-goosey or a little bit more risky. So you can take mechanisms from similar but maybe entirely mechanically different games and put them into a game that you are currently running and see how it goes. There's no reason why you can't do that. I don't think rules are sacred. Other people in the world will disagree with me. I think they're more like guidelines, and you should do what you want with them, the pirate in me says. And you should use them as long as they are in service to the fun that you are trying to have. And that fun might be very specific and very number crunching, in which case then use all of the rules. But it might not be, in which case, fuck them. Do what you want. So that's my wax poetic about the rules. The question, we'll talk a little bit about one-shot stuff, but how much visual aid do I use in my campaign? I feel like I overdo it on the art side, more true on roll. Okay, so visual elements, art, Roll20 versus in-person play, and that also brings in Iffy's question of miniatures and maps. Short answer, Iffy, yes and no. Really helpful. There is a lot of value in having a location map. There's also a lot of flexibility that you lose by having a location map. So by specifically saying, this is what a place looks like, then it makes it much easier. Like the players can look at it and they'll be like, I'm going to go through the door on the left because they know that there is a door on the left because it's on your map. But, and this is a thing that happens to me, is sometimes when I plan a location, I overplan. I put more things in it than they need. And so now there's a door on the left and there's nothing in that room. And so instead they're going to be like, I go through the door on the left, and I'm going to be like, there's nothing in that room. And we just have a whole moment of them trying to figure out how to get into this door, into this room that is entirely pointless for them to have. But if they didn't know what the map looked like, and I had just maybe a rough outline of the map, there can be a door there if I need there to be a door. If I don't need there to be a door, then there is no door. It's Schrodinger's door. The door is only there once it is observed as being there. So by having a set map for a location, and I ran into this a lot with Shadowrun, because I built a lot of maps when I played Shadowrun. And by built I mean I stole maps for existing buildings when I was playing Shadowrun. I had a lot of blueprints saved on my computer, and I had a lot of Google searches about blueprints of buildings. And I would hand them like these detailed maps and be like, this is what the space on the inside looks like. And in some ways that was really helpful because we could all be on the exact same place on the same part of the map and be like, I'm going down the hallway here. And you could that's where you can start getting into your kind of granular use of miniatures, right? Where you're saying, I'm going to move 30 feet down the hallway. And you move your 30 feet down the hallway and then something happens. Or nothing happens. But what tended to happen is those maps were overly detailed and complicated, and there wasn't necessarily a good way for me to signal what they actually needed in that location. So they could have spent like the entire campaign session just opening doors that they didn't need to open, that there was nothing in that room. And it's not interesting, and it just becomes a kind of repetitive mechanic over and over and over again. Okay, I break down the door, I have to data spike it. And sometimes it can be fun to throw in a couple of red herrings of like, maybe this door is important. But normally they would get themselves in enough trouble and take enough time getting to the important door that I didn't need to have a bunch of other red herring doors because I just needed them to get somewhere. I hope the FBI didn't wonder why I had so many building maps. But maybe. Yeah, one of them built their entire character on being able to smash open doors. That was pretty great. So there is value in it makes it very clear what is going on. Everybody can see where they're going. But it also means that you do lose that flexibility of being able to just stop, be like, this room shouldn't exist anymore because we don't have enough time for this room to exist. And this may be more of an issue for someone like me who's running games with a time limit, where I've got 3 hours and I'm trying to fit a certain number of content into 2 episodes, and I'm trying to wrap up at the right point. And I don't want the audience to sit there and watch us like repeatedly, mechanically break down a door, then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. It's true. Sometimes you want a bathroom to be there because you never know when your players need to make them still feel better in the bathroom. So like sometimes there is that the mechanical piece that's really useful, where you're trying to, like, where you want everybody to know what's going on. And so, like, it was interesting to see Keeson drew last night in Worlds Beyond. We had this fight happening in a room, and he drew an image of the room, and then I also drew it. And so we were all kind of on the same page of what it looked like. I could be like, you guys went to the left, and you came in this door. And that is a place where, in hindsight, I knew they were going to end up in that room, and I knew they were going to have to deal with something in that room. I could have very easily created just a very brief sketch map that I handed to all of them. And it didn't need to have enough detail on it of, like, placing miniatures. But it was very helpful because it's a circular room with 6 identical doors in it and something in the middle for us to all be able to say, like, yes, we're going to put it here and we're going to put it here. And I forgot, that's something that I used to do. That's, like, in Shadowrun, I started simplifying my maps, and so I'd start putting, like, here's what the campus looks like, so they know where all the buildings are. And then figuring out better ways of signaling, like, this is the important thing. So, like, a good example from yesterday's Worlds Beyond, 6 rooms, 6 identical doors, they knew which one they had to get to, and it was easy for them to spot. So rather than them having to deal with 6 doors, or I guess 5, because the one they came through they wouldn't have had to deal with, and the dog, they just had to deal with the dog because they knew which door to go to. I could also have not signaled it that way and let them, like, problem solve and be like, they just have to figure out which door they're supposed to go to, and put these symbols up there and let them, like, puzzle around it. But I also knew that I'd made the dog really difficult for them to deal with. So having 2 layers of puzzles was maybe not the best plan for that room. So in hindsight, like, I've thought a little bit about some of the stuff I did with the Hades arc, and I probably would do things a little bit differently. I handed them solutions to a lot more problems than I would typically do, because I knew they were very hurt, and they didn't have a lot of time, and they weren't solutions that were going to be readily apparent, I thought, to the players. That being said, I kind of wish I'd put more challenges in front of them without giving them the answer right away. But I would have needed to put fewer challenges in front of them. That's the trade-off. So, there is some useful parts to having a visual map that everybody can reference, but your trade-off is that flexibility. So I tend not to do dungeon crawls anymore, because of the way I run, like, a lot more of a loosey-goosey sort of narrative, and I'm not really interested in, like, there's no traps, right? So I ask them, like, how are you approaching looking for this? How are you approaching exploring this space? And then I'll tell them what they find. So reminding myself, like, when there's an encounter in a physical space, it can be useful for everyone to have a rough diagram of what that physical space looks like. But it's also why I will instead do a lot of verbal re-descriptions of what a physical space looks like. Mission possible. Possible. And that's the sort of trade-off of that. The visuals, I think, Roxbus, you were asking about visuals. Visuals can be really useful. Having images for people to look at, because not everyone can, like, verbal descriptions are great, and I do a lot of them, and obviously I do more of them because on stream especially you have, like, weird things with being like, copyrighted images and stuff, like, don't necessarily want to show it to people, like pop up with the images of what it looks like, but having visuals for people to reference, like, it's awesome. I loved looking at it. Like, Steph would draw some of the characters from Eat, Pray, Kill, like the NPCs and stuff that they were encountering, and I thought it was fucking awesome. If I was an artist, I would have done that shit. The only reason I don't do a lot of it is because I'm not an artist. So for me, I'd have to find someone else's artwork to reference. And obviously on stream, that can be problematic to be like, look at this other person's art who's not affiliated with us at all. That being said, using touchstones are really useful. So like describing something in terms of popular culture or a thing that people recognize can be a helpful way for everyone to get the same sort of image in their head. Like, there's nothing wrong with describing an NPC as looking like, As Technology 21, thank you for that subscription. There's nothing wrong with describing an NPC looking like a specific celebrity. Just be careful how obscure that celebrity is, but then everybody knows what that NPC looks like. And so that kind of can help put like a visual in everybody's head. Or describing, like, I didn't do this, but I probably, in my mind, like, Cerberus looked a little like a German Shepherd. Like a black German Shepherd. And I was like, I probably should have just said that because everybody knew what... Raxmas, I'm so excited for fan art. Thank you. Everyone knows what a German Shepherd is, right? Not everyone, but most people know what a German Shepherd is. So that would have helped, like, probably get people's mind around what it looked like. And some people might have zero knowledge of what celebrities look like. Very normal. It works for those who recognize it. But yeah, there's no... Visuals, I think, are a really great thing to have. One of my favorite parts about Eat, Pray, Kill, like, Steph drew character icons for all the characters. I love when shows have character icons or character art. From a show perspective, that's a really great thing. Obviously, it is expensive, and we love artists, which is part of why we love fan art, but, like, getting commissioned art is not a cheap thing. As it shouldn't be. So that's, like, your trade-off when you're running on our budget. But when you have fan art and community involvement, but that's also why, like, we do the costuming pieces and things like that. So people can kind of create this sense of setting and location and character with, Frodo. Oh, Mr. Fantastic. Yeah, but we can kind of create that visual sense. Like, that's why we do the costuming, because I think the visuals are important. It's part of the overall experience of the RPG. But if you are a GM and you can do those visuals, then that's super cool. And it's like been one of the things, like I'm working in one of the shows that I do is one of the D&D modules. And so we have all of the art from the module. And so instead of just describing an NPC, a lot of the NPCs have art that go with it. And so they can show it off. It is definitely easier to do on Roll20 or an online system than like in person at the table here. In a home game, you could like pull up a laptop. It's not so terrible, or you can print some software, hand around the book. We're not quite set up for that, and I don't want to be like, give us a minute while all of us just Google this thing on our phone and look at it. So the setup is definitely a little bit easier on a system like Roll20, but that also depends on how you've set up your overlays and the visual aspects of a stream. Obviously, that doesn't matter if it's like just a game that you and friends are playing on Roll20, but it's got a whole integrated system for sharing. It's got a chat, so you could just post a link. It's also got like a place you can input materials and share them directly that way. So no, I don't, you can go overboard on them, but going overboard on visuals is mostly a question of, are you having fun creating them, and how much time is it taking you? Like, do you have the time to do it? Well, thank you, the Saltiest Taylor. I like this scarf too. It's very fuzzy. It's big and soft. Yeah. So in terms of visuals, it's really, really variable. But it's why a lot of the shows I do encourage costuming, because it's a lot of fun. People can kind of get an instant grasp. There is some forethought that goes into crafting the visuals of a stream, because obviously, or of something, just because. Like creating a map as part of your prep work. And so I do sketch maps. Like I will draw maps of things as part of my notes. I'm actually going to be posting all of my notes over on my Patreon for Worlds Beyond So you can check them out there. They'll just be in a PDF, and you can download them, and you'll see the weird little annotations I make. And occasionally, I think one set of notes I had a bunch of little notes from Steph in it, which was both adorable, and I didn't remember those were there. So you can see like how much I plan both maps, and that varies a lot. Some things I'll plan more, and some I won't. But it does mean it does lead to confusion. I've definitely had moments where people have thought one thing and the other thing has been true because we haven't had a map. That being said, I've run into the same thing even with a map. Like where you're like, I thought someone was standing over here, and like they were standing over there because, you just got confused about which person's miniature was which. Do I decide on a new system or setting before getting a cast, or does your cast help guide that decision? I have typically I've done both. It depends. So here at Geekspace, because of life and because of people, I will typically ask, with Worlds Beyond, I've asked a lot of the people who did Leviathan if they were available, but a lot of them weren't available, or some of them were and some of them weren't. And so then it was a matter of kind of finding different cast members. So in the case of Worlds Beyond, I found the system first. I was like, I want to run the Strange. Actually, that's a lie. I started doing both at the same time, so I started reaching out to cast members being like, I'm going to run something. Do you want to do it with me on Wednesday nights? Not like that. Then I finally made my decision about what setting I actually wanted to run. And I think I had almost all of my cast at that point, but I was still looking for one other person in order to like kind of fill out 5 people. And so that was kind of a little bit of both. Like Worlds Beyond, sort of both were happening simultaneously. Pumpkin. We are talking about cast versus system first, the order in which one acquires those things. So yeah, Worlds Beyond kind of happened like a little bit both simultaneously. Leviathan was setting up front. I don't think I'd settled on Stars Without Number before I started reaching out to the cast, but I had decided that I wanted to run a space opera. That was like the first thing that I'd come up with, and then I reached out to the cast. And then once I was like, okay, what's my best system option available, then it came to Stars Without Number. So that was setting, then cast, then system. Worlds Beyond was definitely cast, setting, system, somewhere like that. Good Society, that was definitely system, and then Who Wants to Do It? In the RPG cast of just like people who were available because we were filling in a slot. And one shots will normally go system first and then cast. But sometimes they'll go the other way around. Well, I'll get a cast. How far away from Core Stars did Leviathan get by the end? Pretty far. It was a pretty intense over by the end of it, I think. I've written them up. I think there's a link to it over on the Geekspace wiki to my Patreon post that has like the entire homebrew that I created for it. That will give you a pretty solid idea of how much farther away it got. The core mechanics were still the same, mostly. Turns out I was not prepared for that fatal of a system. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I also had a hard time with it's the same thing I have with D&D, though. It's like a flat pass-fail mechanism for the DCs, and so I was just like, what if we just do partial success and success, and then fail? Like, what if we basically turn it into Apocalypse World for the success-fail mechanic? Yeah, like, they both still had dice. Exactly. We were using dice. Stars Without Number uses dice. Still using the dice. I'm trying to think of some of the other shows that I've done. Other ones, like the ones that I've done on Roll4It, those ones have tended to be, we are like the Sunday group of players who basically Like, unless something happens, that's the group. And so then it's like, I know who my cast is going to be. So I'm like, hey, here's my pitch to the group of like, this is a game that I think would be fun. And then they either say yay or no to it. And if everybody's excited about it, then they're more likely to say, yes, let's run that. Yeah, I mean, I think the first, in session 0, when we built characters, Claudia, or maybe it was Sarah, one of the characters had 1 hit point. And I was like, ha, 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 ha. So I upped that pretty rapidly. I was like, this is our first change that we're going to make. Yeah, they normally say yay. They've said it twice, and I've had 2 pretty weird ideas. I'm like, what if we did King Arthurian Legends, but with high schoolers? And they said yes to that, so, that's how my brain works. I loved Leviathan. I loved it truly, deeply, and dearly. They were such an amazing group to play with, and that was not the story that I set out to tell at the beginning, but it was the story that I'm glad we told by the end. And actually, a lot of it was still the story I set out to tell at the beginning. There were twists and turns I did not anticipate, Jeremiah Bisquick Hines. But it was a delight. Like, that show, in many ways, encapsulated a lot of things I wanted. I will say Worlds Beyond, like, right now, is encapsulating some of my favorite things about working with the players that I have, and like them taking on this kind of initiative for the storytelling that I'm absolutely loving. That is one of my favorite things that I'm getting to experience in Worlds Beyond, and I think this story is a lot more character driven than it is necessarily plot driven, because all of them have so much going on as individual characters that I'm just like constantly like, I need to talk to this, I need to talk to them, I need to talk to them about this. And I've sent like multiple messages about like, so let me ask you questions about your character and their motivations. And it's been a lot of fun to like drive something so much more intently on a character narrative than any sort of overarching story. And you have characters like Janine's letter. I read it yesterday for the first time, and like the way she ended it, I was like, it was a great gift. Such a great gift, I should say. Yeah. So with cast, I would say in terms of home game, I have typically been like, these are my people that I'm playing with, these are my friends, and then we found a system. Although my very first RPG, that's a lie. The very first RPG I did was both, because I was like, I want to run Shadowrun. I want to run Shadowrun for all of my friends, but also all of my other friends. What if I ran Shadowrun for 8 people? It's not a good idea. I don't recommend that. Janine is... She's coming back. Spoilers. Whether or not Jade is coming back, that's actually a conversation me and Janine still need to have, but Janine's coming back. So pro tip, 8 is too many players. 6 is good. 4 is also great. 4 is like a nice number of players. 3 works, and up to 6 works. Anything more than 6, and you're making terrible life choices. 8-person Shadowrun isn't impossible, but boy, does combat take a long time. How does being on Twitch affect those numbers? Excellent question, Anna. Actually, I will say being on Twitch impacts those numbers in both senses. So, a home game with 3 people, and I've run them, it works. It tends to be a shorter game. It doesn't quite take as long. When you are streaming, it varies. 3 can be tricky to have just because you're putting a lot on fewer people to fill airtime. So if you think about it from just a pure numbers perspective, say you're doing like a 3-ish hour RPG if there are 6 people at the table, each person needs to fill about 30 minutes of airtime. If you half that number and put 3 people at the table, each person needs to fill almost a full hour on their own. And it just puts a lot more of a burden on each individual person to be on the whole time, because there are fewer people at the table, so your character's going to be in most of the scenes. So one option, you do shorter sessions. The other option is you just don't do that as often, or you take a longer break or things like that. Just something to be aware of when you're performing. The fewer people you have in your cast, the more each person has to carry the weight of the single performance. And obviously you need to balance your encounters around having fewer people and kind of doing that. Yeah, exactly. You can do one player, one GM. It's intense. But you probably don't want to do that for more than like 2 or 3 weeks, because that's a lot. That's an hour and a half for each person to like really be running it. And on the farther end of the spectrum, you can get away with more players than I would normally recommend in a home game. Like, I've run with 6 people, but it can get really chaotic. But in an RPG, there is a tendency for people, when you're streaming it, when you're performing, people tend to be more engaged and better at sharing time with each other because they're performing. They're thinking about things like not talking over each other, not having side conversations, and like really being focused and engaged. And so you mitigate a lot of those issues you have with just having a lot of people at the table, which is that those people will talk over each other or take up a lot of space, or it just becomes chaotic and confusing and things like that. So I would say I would still aim normally for about 4 people during an RPG. Having 5 people as the base number for the group does help with issues of what happens if someone's going to be out. But this is the caveat, I will say: fewer people if you're doing an online streamed game, because it's much harder to take turns when you're reliant on the technology. Because as soon as 2 people start talking, no one can hear anything that's going on. It's harder to share focus and know who's doing it because you have fewer social cues. So an in-person RPG, I would recommend 4 is a minimum sort of number for a show, unless it's a short one, maybe 3. 5 is my main number, because if you have 5 people, then if one person's out for a week, you don't need to bring in a guest. For a streamed game, I would say 4 at maximum, just because you start running into numbers and people having a hard time making sure no one's talking over anyone. It's a little bit harder. But then you obviously have more issues if someone has to be gone for a week. So yeah, 3 to 5 players is very standard across the hobby, and it still translates pretty well into a streamed RPG. But some of the reasoning behind it is a little bit different. So here at Geekspace, I aim for 5 people as the show cast. For example, like Janine, who's going to be gone for a month, I don't need to bring in a person for a month because the rest of my cast is going to be there. I'll have 1 3-person episode, and then the other will be 4-person episodes. And that's fine. That's fine. That works. Oh, yeah, that's a good way to do it. If you are doing like a streamed game like Roll20, using chats, like text chat for side BS, and then if you are talking about the game, that's when you're using voice. Yeah, you can do it with more. I've run tables of 8. I've run 6 to 8 tables of strangers at like D&D Adventure League and stuff like that. It's a lot. It's exhausting in its own way, but you can do it. Yeah, like Trooper saying, you wouldn't do Cthulhu Confidential with 1 person and 1 GM for 20 weeks, but like 2 to 3 episodes, totally doable. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, what does X do while Y is away? That's a thing. That is a thing that you have to think about, and like that's part of me as the GM. I like to use some of those things as opportunities. The opportunity, having a player out is a narrative opportunity that you should ask your players permission for, things that you might want to do to their character. I have kidnapped a lot of characters, players, because they've been out for the week. That is not an uncommon thing, and I tend to have them go unconscious if it's like a really short notice thing and I didn't know. So like that happened to Thea. Thea was unconscious for a whole episode. I had Dan just straight up, Conrad was just kidnapped for like 6 weeks. That was a whole separate thing. What are other tropes that I use? Yeah, unconscious, kidnapped, on a different mission. It's a little bit easier if they're out for like 2 weeks, because then they can just be like, oh, they're doing a whole different mission. In trouble. They're in trouble. They have to stay behind. Keep it simple. They got food poisoning. They got lost. Yep, those are good ones. Food poisoning, lost. Sometimes if you know it's going to be an extended one, then it can be fun to make that part of the story. So like Jade's is going to be big. It's part of the story. We're going to talk about what it'll look like. I've used character faked their death. That was a great one. And so we planned a whole section around that. Like that was the whole lead up. I was like, what's going to cause them to, how are they going to fake their death? What's the lead up to that? Like that was an emotional sucker punch. UGM for to go visit family. Yeah, I think I had that. I think someone went back to Boston. Fang was so mad at me. Claudia has been mad at me a few times. It's fine. She got over it probably. She still does RPGs with me, so she's probably been okay with it. What are other things that I've done when players have been out? Leviathan tended to have some short notice ones where like I wasn't prepared for the character to be out, because just shit happened, and so they were like, oh, I'm gonna have to be out, and I'm like, that's fine. I think, we had the whole one where Thea was also gone for a whole episode, and she basically just ran the other half of the dungeon. So we had one person. I want Claudia on here. I just have to figure out if I can get her on here because timing. It's on the list. The PC. Yeah, no. The PC went to visit family. I think I've had players do that. So I had, Thea ran the other half. That was sort of useful because I was like, well, there's 2 halves to this dungeon. So what if I just have my players who aren't here mechanically running half of the dungeon while the other half of the dungeon is done by the players? So essentially a lot of action was happening off scene, and that was me making rolls for the other player and basically saying they're going to make their way through this. They're going to do a bunch of other things. They were invisible, I think, while they did the whole thing because they could turn invisible. That was an ability I gave her, for better or for worse. And so she was basically did a whole bunch of other stuff. So like you can have them support the other group without being there. That was when I've used that a few times where like they're doing stuff. So it's worth talking to your player and knowing like if they're okay with you running their character for them. I do that a fair amount where I'll be like, okay, your character's here, but here are the basic things that they're gonna do. I sent Ziana to rescue someone. Ziana went and met up with Hexy. That was a whole episode. Yeah, there's a bunch of things, but it can be a narrative opportunity. Sometimes you just got to be like, nope, it's just happening. Yeah, mini side missions. Sometimes it can be a big thing, and other times it's just like they're just gone. They're busy. They're taking a nap. It depends on how much notice you have. If I have a lot of notice, then I'll normally build it into the story. If I have a day, or if I have already done the planning, or we are halfway through a narrative, like a 2-part section, then it'll just be whatever works best for that moment. But when I GM, how does the story come to me? Very derivative in my work. Significant influences from things that I have recently been consuming in popular culture and fiction. Like books that I've read, TV shows that I've watched will definitely be major influences in terms of like what major story elements I'm going to have. A lot of it for some stuff is, Hades is an excellent example of that. I had an entirely different plot line, and then I spent 6 hours playing an RPG, and I was like, this would make a great setting for Worlds Beyond. Well, I guess we're doing that now. Base an entire thing on them. So yeah, like whatever tropes the show has, if I'm basing it off of a show that exists, often the media I have most recently consumed will be a pretty significant inspiration for what I'm doing. The other one will be, if I'm doing something that's a little bit more generic, like Stars Without Leviathan was a little bit more of a generic space opera, so I pulled in elements from my favorite space operas, like you can see the influences of Andromeda Ascendant, of Mass Effect, of even like a little bit of Firefly, which isn't isn't quite the space opera, but like some influence from that. I'm trying to think. I feel like Andromeda and Mass Effect were like the two biggest influences on it, but there were a couple of other ones. So oh my goodness, I really hope someone draws Farscape. Thank you. That was the other one. I was like, there's a third one that's very important. It was Farscape. And Fifth Element, a little bit of that one, especially when they went to, wasn't Duranga. Duranga was the bad planet. The Mara. Be a train on Mara. So yeah, the influences are a little bit broader in that case, and so I'll kind of pull some of my favorite elements. And then I also will think about some of my, like, tone or emotional tone. And then a lot of it's also player driven. So like, especially in Worlds Beyond, like good chunks of this so far have been initiated either by what the players are interested, what the players have said to me, or what their characters have talked about. So we're going to have a bunch of stuff like related to Oz and related to Anon and Pine and all of those things like coming together because I've got a whole bunch of stuff to deal with for the characters, and that's a component of it too. So I'll take things that they've said. So like, really great example in Leviathan. This was probably one of my favorite moments, and when I was like, I'm so glad Sarah's in this. We were talking about like all of these options. Like, here's the thing: they've got to like power up the ship, make it better, make it do stuff better, and you'll have to go to like a place to buy weapons, and that'll be really hard to find. And then Sarah goes, oh yeah, like Duranga, I remember that. My parents used to go there. And I was like, tell me more about this planet. And so the entire basis for Duranga just came from Sarah's character's comment, Thea's comment about like this backwater, like black market planet. And I was like, yep, that exists now. That's part of this world and this setting, and I'm going to use it to my advantage. And so stuff like that, it'll come from the players. I don't think we'll go to the bad baby recursion because I don't really want to build that recursion. That's a lot of babies. It's a lot of babies. I've got my 5-minute signal, and I think it's like a good meandering conversation, which talked about like two of the big things. Picking players, and also safety at the table, or players system, what comes first. Peeks ahead at recursions. I gave them a list. Here, do you want let me read you the list. This is the list that I sent to the players, and I asked them to tell me what they were interested in. So we'll see if any of these show up. Okay. We have I said Gothic / Monster / Van Helsing, Steampunk, Cyberpunk, Spy Heist, 20s Gangster, Almost Earth, Space Station Future, Treasure Hunter, Indiana Jones. Those are all ideas that I have written down right now about possible recursions. The last thing I wanted to just touch on a little bit is scheduling in general, is getting people all in one place. There's a lot of tools available now for communication online. Discord is excellent, or any like group communication tools, but I use a lot of doodles. I do Bad Babies, it's just 1950s juvenile delinquents. Oh. That's such a lovely... 30 style Flash Gordon space opera. Fascinating. That would be fascinating. So there's a lot of tools out there. If you're ever looking for resources, like Doodle is my go-to. Doodle is definitely the go-to in terms of getting people scheduled, because that is a nightmare. And then good communication. Interested in an animated world recursion? I think that would be complicated. Possibly. All right. I think with that, we can more or less wrap up. You've seen the little brief sneaksy peeksies at possible recursions for Behind the Screens. We will be back tomorrow here with another episode of Crossmas. I'm very excited. This week I will have all of the players. We will have Strawberry, Oz, the Starling, Ada, and Rachel. It's going to be glorious and wonderful, and they are going to start Enthroned, so we'll see how that goes for everybody. That'll be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific time here on the same channel. before that, sometime probably around 3-ish in the afternoon, we'll tweet it out / post in the Discord when we are going to be streaming the first episode, so you can catch a rerun of it and then jump straight in and watch the second episode. As always, with many of our shows, you can catch up on them on YouTube. You can watch Worlds Beyond. You can watch Live and Distant Stars, Eat or Kill, all of that good stuff. But yeah, tomorrow night will be our last show for the year. Anna's going to be taking over for 30-ish minutes, chatting about the studio and stuff that's upcoming. So stay tuned. We're going to go to a really brief break screen. Meantime, if you have questions or things you want to talk about related to streaming and playing and running RPGs, head over to the Geek Space Discord. I'm going to try and post some of the resources for safety tools over there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you in a few minutes.